How do you pick a market and what's considered a good market?
Literally, I don't care what market it is. I don't care if we're doing this anywhere. It's about where you have the team. And over the last 13 and a half years, I have bought houses in dozens of cities all across the country. And this is what everybody does. They search what are the cheapest markets to buy housing in the United States. And then the same markets come up and they remain the cheapest because you don't have reliable people that can help you onboard the property and cash flow it. And if we can't onboard it and cash flow it for a long period of time, it's worthless to me. It's going to be a money pit. It's going to be a problem. It's going to cause anxiety and issues. Once you do have that team, then you have to see if it makes sense. So instead of looking at the numbers and saying, okay, I like these numbers, let's go there. That's backwards. First, where do we have a team? Now, okay, now I have people I can rely on. Now, what do the numbers look like? And that's how we choose our markets.
Detroit has a lot of great areas to live, a lot of low crime areas to live, because the majority of the crime can be narrowed down to 3 or 4 zip codes. And when I say the majority, probably 80% of it. And don't get me wrong, even in each zip code, there are going to be pockets of good places to live. Some good zip codes in our bag. 48221, that's probably the number one desirable zip code to live in the entire city. Closely behind it would be 48235, 48227, and 48228. And 48229, most of it. There's some parts in there that you don't want to be in. So those are all West Side zip codes that are good places to invest. There's some good spots in 206 and 204, but it's like any place else. Take a look around where you're considering buying a home and ask yourself, would you live there? On the east side, probably 48224 is the most desirable. It contains 2 of the most desirable subdivisions called Morningside and East English Village. Parts of 48215 down near Jefferson, they're putting up $200,000 value plus homes over there. And some parts of 48213, and then all of your short eastern suburbs, like the Harper Woods now and East Point, those are decent areas as well.
This last deal that I closed on, that was probably a double, like in the Gap, good shot. This was another condo, 2-bedroom, Old Orchard Beach, 1.5 miles from the beach. Yeah, it was another off-market deal. So my past 4 deals have been off-market. And how that happens is it's just word of mouth. Honestly, I reached out to the HOA, said, hey, I've lived here and also owned here for about 17 years. If anybody's looking to sell, please reach out. And that's what happened. This guy was interested in considering selling about 1.5 years ago. In July, he got more serious. We signed a purchase and sales agreement for January 16th of 2024. So I'm like, this is awesome too, because now I'm gaining some appreciation. Despite what the economy and media might say, prices are still kind of going up if you're buying in the right areas. It's just not going up as fast. I got 1,500 seller concessions. I got the deal for $197.5. It was I paid him for the GFCI. I needed a drain plug. I needed a few lights in, just light bulbs in the fans, a gas detector and smoke detectors. I put in a whopping $206 with the 7% interest rate, 25% down, $2,020 in rent, not including utilities. I don't pay for them. She gets a voucher, and there's a $200 HOA. And combine that with the 5% of anticipatory costs for repair work and whatnot, I'm making 14% cash on cash. The whole annual return, when I combine the unrealized gains, the principal pay down and the appreciation, is 24.2% return first year.
You don't want to spend more than $2,500 to $3,000 on a property once we close on it to get it to inspection ready level. Every day it takes you to find that tenant means that property is vacant, which means you're not making money on it, but you're spending money on it. What happens when they move out and you have to turn that unit? It's going to be vacant when you turn it, and when you market for a new tenant, and when you have to place a new tenant, even if you're proactive about marketing ahead of time. And so those things all matter. I mean, so we factor in pretty much an 8% vacancy, an 8% maintenance reserve into every underwriting report that we do. And our buy box is very, very simple. It's $85,000 to $105,000. It needs to be a 3-bedroom single family home or more in a market that we can get at least $1,350 to $1,400 in rent on, so that we can cash flow on average about $600 net per door per month after debt and everything.
The best thing to do is to find the local housing authority, call it PHA, Public Housing Authority, in your area, and you can speak to them. Well, first of all, they'll tell you how they determine rents. Depending on the jurisdiction, sometimes rents are determined by zip code, and sometimes rents are determined by other means, like it could be neighborhoods. Lots of different ways, but you need to find out how they determine their rents. That's number one. Number two is the rent that you'll get will depend on the number of bedrooms in the house. 4 bedrooms, typically it's 4,700. 5 bedrooms is 5,400. 6 bedrooms is 6,200. There's a 3-bedroom, 1 bath when I bought it. We ended up paying $555,000 for it, which in this area, that's a C neighborhood. So we turned this thing into a 5-bedroom, 3.5 bath. So I was in it for around $760,000. That's the acquisition plus the renovation plus other Mickey Mouse stuff. The rent is $5,462. The tenant's portion is $159.
Say that one more time, just so people will catch that.
The tenant's portion of the $5,462 rent is $159, which means that every month, just keep it round numbers, I'm getting $5,300 from the housing authority and $159 from the tenant. So whether the tenant pays me or not is almost irrelevant, because that $5,300 is going to hit my account every month, come what may. As long as that tenant's in that house, I'm getting that $5,300. And the idea is this is a long-term play. Give it another 5 years, that'll be a $1.2 million neighborhood easily. I don't want to wait 5 years and regret not buying in this neighborhood when it was cheap.
So Midfield's kind of an interesting market because there are some higher crime areas in Midfield, but there are also a lot of pockets that have virtually no crime. This one was definitely in one of those pockets. Within a 3/4 mile radius of the house, there were no shootings, and we used spot crime to assess all of that information. The purchase price of the house was 70 grand. There needed practically no renovations. The rent was $765 a month, and we bumped it up to $1,201. The great thing about that is, since the tenant's income didn't increase, their portion really doesn't go up much. It's mostly Section 8 that's covering that increase, which is really nice.
Yeah, and that particular property, the tenant hadn't had an increase in their rent in quite a few years. I believe it was 7, 8, 9 years, something like that. So because the lease or the rental was $765, the seller couldn't get much more than 70 grand for it, and it was in very good shape. So once we bought the property, we had our property management company, because that was our first acquisition. And we said, listen, this property hasn't seen a rent increase in years. What's the chance of increasing that rent? And they said, very good, because current market rent in that area is about $1,150 to $1,250. We think you can get probably $1,200. And of course, my concern was, how's that going to impact the tenant? Because she's a great tenant. She's a Class A tenant. And I didn't want to lose that. And they said, well, we can discuss it with her. Normally what happens is we submit the rent request to the housing authority for approval. They tell you what they're willing to pay. And then the tenant ultimately can say whether or not they want to go forward with it. So it just so happened, like Jeff said, the tenant's portion didn't go up very much because they were already at the top of their 40% of their income that goes towards rental. So they didn't really see a big bump. And the government basically acknowledged the fact that this was well below current rent. So they bumped it up, and it turned into a very good deal. Jeff, I think the cash flow is roughly around 30% cash on cash return right now.
Right now, with property management, it's 29.7%. And if property management goes, it's going to be in excess of 40.